Naomi Clark stepped into the bright terminal of Boston Logan International Airport just as the late afternoon sun began to lean toward the horizon. She carried a single rolling suitcase and a small tote bag, curious glances flicking toward the flight information displays overhead. The screen showed her flight, BOS to MIA, departing in just under 2 hours. Even though Naomi had flown dozens of times for work and pleasure, she felt a flutter of excitement. This trip was different. She had booked a first-class seat for the first time in her life, a small reward to herself after wrapping up a challenging marketing campaign. The past week had been a whirlwind of deadlines, team meetings, and late nights drafting copy. Now, the pressure felt like a distant memory as she moved toward the check-in counter. Behind the glossy desk, the attendant greeted her with a polite smile. Naomi handed over her ID and ticket, murmuring, "I decided to treat myself today." The word treat felt light in her mouth, as though it were a secret between her and the attendant. Within moments, she had her boarding pass stamped with the golden one that identified her seat in the first-class cabin. The attendant pointed her toward the lounge, an upscale waiting area full of plush chairs, quiet corners, and a buffet of snacks and beverages. Naomi's heart lifted. She headed off to find a comfortable spot, her anticipation growing with every step. Walking through the lounge, she paused by the windows to watch planes taxiing and taking off. A soft breeze drifted in whenever a door opened, carrying with it the distant rumble of engines and the smell of fresh coffee. She settled into an armchair upholstered in soft leather, its deep cushions inviting her to sink in. Naomi pulled out her phone to send a quick text to her best friend, Angela. "I'm in the lounge, first time in first class, wish me luck." Almost instantly, Angela replied with firework emojis and cheering messages. "You deserve it, can't wait to hear all about it." Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the smooth, wide seat she would find on board. She imagined reclining fully, propping a pillow behind her lower back and settling in as the flight attendants offered her a glass of sparkling water, or perhaps a mimosa. She thought about the fresh, warm meal served on fine china. In her mind, she could taste the butter melting on warm bread, feel the warmth of a carefully prepared entree, and hear the gentle clink of silverware against the plate. The idea of being pampered, of having every detail attended to, made her shoulders relax for the first time in days. Even so, Naomi knew herself well enough to bring one precautionary item. Inside her tote bag was a simple homemade sandwich, crafted that very morning with care. It wasn't because she doubted the airline's meal service. She had flown first class before and knew the food was usually excellent. Still, she liked having a backup, just in case hunger struck at an odd moment or the service ran behind schedule. When she had checked her bag at the counter, she had explained softly to the attendant, "I made this at home just in case I get peckish before the meal service." The attendant had nodded politely, scanning the sandwich through security without a word of warning or concern. Naomi had slipped the sandwich into her tote, tucking it safely beside her wallet. Time passed in a pleasant blur. Naomi sipped a cup of green tea from the lounge's beverage station, flipping through an in-flight magazine while lounging in her chair. She watched other travelers in matching first-class territory, a businessman tapping away on his laptop, a family reading quietly together, and a young couple sharing soft laughter over shared earbuds. Despite the subdued atmosphere, there was an undercurrent of excitement, an awareness that soon they would all cross into the sky, leaving the city behind. When the announcement came that her flight was boarding, Naomi felt a thrill run through her. She gathered her things, rolled her suitcase across the plush carpet, and joined the priority line. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass with a beep and a friendly, "Enjoy your flight, Miss Clark." She stepped down the jetway and entered the plane where the first-class cabin stretched out before her like a private lounge in the sky. Polished wood accents and soft lighting created a calm, elegant environment. Seats were arranged with ample space between them, each one separated by a small partition for privacy. The cushions looked deep and inviting. Naomi found her seat, 1A, at the very front of the cabin. It sat beside a large oval window, the glass tinted slightly to soften the afternoon glare. She slipped off her light jacket and tucked it into the overhead bin, then placed her tote bag on the seat beside her. A friendly flight attendant approached, offering a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Clark. Can I get you anything before takeoff? A glass of water, perhaps?" Naomi shook her head gently and returned a smile of her own. "Nothing right now, thank you. I'm just settling in." The attendant nodded and moved on to the next seat, extending the same courtesy to the other passengers. Naomi ran her hand along the smooth armrest and pressed a button quietly on the console. The seat gently hummed and glided backward. She felt the fabric shift underneath her and the leg rest begin to lift. Finding the angle she liked, she stopped the movement and leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The gentle motion reminded her of a reclining chair at home, but infinitely more luxurious. She propped the small pillow the airline had placed for her lower back and sighed as her muscles loosened around it. Even with all this comfort, she knew she had that homemade sandwich safely tucked away just in case. The sandwich had been made with 2 slices of hearty whole grain bread, spread lightly with butter. Between them were layers of turkey, a crisp leaf of lettuce, and a few thin slices of ripe tomato. A touch of mustard gave it flavor without overwhelming the other ingredients. She had wrapped it carefully in wax paper and then slipped it into a resealable bag, so it would stay fresh and protected. It felt reassuring to know it was there if she needed it. As the plane prepared for pushback, Naomi's attention turned to the window. She watched mechanics wave the pilot's headset as the engine started up. A low roar vibrated under her seat, and she could feel the slight tremor through the floor. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers with a calm announcement. "Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome aboard Flight 238 to Miami. We should be wheels up in just a few minutes. We appreciate your choosing our airline and wish you a pleasant journey." The plane began to roll backward gently, and Naomi glanced at the other passengers, sensing their collective anticipation. Soon, the plane taxied to the runway. Naomi stretched out her legs a bit further and leaned back, readying herself for takeoff. She took one last sip of water from her bottle and placed it in the cup holder. Ahead of her, the flight attendant moved through the aisle, checking that seat belts were fastened and tray tables were stowed. Naomi clicked her belt snugly around her waist and watched the attendant's reflection in the window glass for a moment before looking back outside. The runway stretched long and straight, with the city skyline receding behind. When the engine surged, Naomi pressed her hands lightly to the armrests, feeling herself pressed gently back into the seat. The plane accelerated forward, and she peered through the small window as the ground fell away beneath them. Within seconds, they were lifting off, climbing steadily into the sky. As the city faded into patches of green and gray, Naomi smiled to herself. She felt a sense of calm joy she had missed all week. Ahead lay blue sky, soft clouds, and the promise of warm sunshine waiting in Miami. Above all, she looked forward to the moment when the flight attendant would roll that meal cart toward her, offering her a taste of first-class dining. And if, for any reason, things did not go exactly as planned, she would still have her homemade sandwich, her quiet safety net, waiting patiently at her side. Naomi settled into her plush first-class seat, leaning back and letting out a contented sigh. The engine's gentle hum had faded into the steady cadence of cruise, and the cabin lights had dimmed slightly, creating a warm glow around each row. As she fastened her seatbelt and tucked the safety information card into the side pocket, she pictured the meal service that would arrive soon. She imagined a silver tray carefully laid out in front of her, with a neatly arranged appetizer, a steaming main course, and a small dessert, each served with a friendly smile from the flight attendant. In her mind, this was the perfect moment, high above the clouds with every comfort at her fingertips. A few minutes passed before she noticed the flight attendant pushing the meal cart away from the galley. The cart was large and well-stocked, its shelves lined with covered dishes and neatly stacked bread baskets. The attendant guided it down the aisle, pausing briefly at each seat row to present the menu and take orders. When the attendant reached row 1, Naomi raised her hand and spoke softly. "Hello, may I please have the chicken with lemon sauce?" The attendant glanced at her, nodded, and wrote down the choice. Naomi smiled politely, thinking how smoothly everything was going so far. As the cart moved on, Naomi leaned forward to check her watch. It had been only 5 minutes since service began, but she wondered how long it might take for her meal to arrive. She felt a gentle tap on her shoulder and looked up to see the same attendant returning a moment later. In one hand was Naomi's requested chicken dish, still covered with a lid. In the other hand, she held a small plate of bread. Naomi sat up straighter, ready to receive her meal. But just as the attendant stepped close, another flight attendant from further down the aisle approached in a hurry. She reached toward Naomi's side table, where the small homemade sandwich peeked out of Naomi's tote bag. Without a word, she grabbed the sandwich and, almost in the same motion, lifted her arm and tossed it into the service cart's open compartment above. The sandwich hit the metal surface with a soft thud before bouncing once and landing out of sight. Naomi's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. For a moment, she simply stared at the spot where her sandwich had been. The attendant who had tossed it offered a dismissive shrug, then turned and hurried down the aisle to help with the next row. The attendant who held the covered chicken dish stood frozen, as if unsure whether to offer Naomi the meal or wait for instructions. Naomi's heart raced. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, half confusion, half embarrassment. She cleared her throat and said, "Excuse me, what just happened to my sandwich?" The attendant's eyes flicked to Naomi's empty side table, then back up to Naomi's face. "I'm sorry," she murmured, glancing around as though seeking confirmation. "There's no outside food allowed during meal service. We have to remove it." Naomi blinked. "But I asked permission earlier," she said quietly. "I told the check-in agent it was in case I got hungry before the meal." The attendant's shoulders tensed. "Our policy changed," she replied stiffly. "You should have checked with us on board. I'm only following orders." Naomi's stomach dropped. The memory of the polite nod at check-in clashed with the attendant's firm words now. She felt her cheeks flush with warmth. Other passengers were watching, some with polite curiosity, others scrolling on their devices. Naomi wished the seat cushions could swallow her up. She reached for her water bottle and took a small sip, hoping the cold liquid would steady her nerves. The attendant laid the covered dinner on Naomi's tray table with a practiced motion, then placed the bread plate beside it. "Enjoy your meal," she said curtly, before moving on to the next passenger. Naomi's appetite vanished in an instant. Her chicken dinner sat untouched under its lid, while the sandwich she had lovingly prepared lay out of reach, lost somewhere in the cart. She pressed the call button. When the attendant returned, Naomi attempted a calm tone. "Could you please check the cart? My sandwich was in my bag. I'd like to have it if possible." The attendant frowned and waved a hand at the cart still at the front of the cabin. "It's already back there," she said, pointing toward the galley. "Sorry, but it's gone." Naomi's pulse hammered in her ears. She tried again. "I'd really appreciate it if you could see whether it's still there." The attendant's expression hardened. "Nope," she said. "You'll have to make do with what we have." Naomi pressed her lips together, fighting the urge to cry or raise her voice. Instead, she leaned back and set her palms in her lap. She thought of her sandwich, the soft bread, the turkey slices, the fresh lettuce. She felt its absence now, more than ever, like a small but important part of her plan had been taken away. She looked at the covered chicken dish and wondered whether she dared lift the lid. The dark lemon sauce that she could smell faintly from the other end of the cart now seemed uninviting, like a disappointment wrapped in metal. Around her, the cabin was quiet except for the soft click of seat belts and the occasional rustle of aluminum cans being opened. She could hear the hum of the air conditioning vent above, the low drone of the engines, and the muffled murmur of other passengers accepting their meals. None of them seemed to notice what had happened, and Naomi felt more alone than she had in years. She thought back to why she had brought the sandwich in the first place. It was a small act of self-care, a way to ensure she would feel comfortable if the meal service was delayed or if the menu did not suit her taste. It made sense at the time. Food was food, and she had plenty of room in her bag. Yet now it felt like the one thing she controlled had been taken. She took a deep breath, trying to release the tension in her shoulders. As the cart moved on and the dinner service continued, Naomi tried to focus on the chicken dish before her. She lifted the lid and revealed the tender chicken breast, glazed, with a pale yellow sauce. Steamed vegetables sat beside it, broccoli, carrots, and a few baby potatoes. The bread was warm and soft, neatly sliced, with a pat of butter on top. The meal looked fine, but in that moment it felt hollow. She poked a forkful of broccoli, then another of potato, tasting nothing but her own disappointment. She glanced around, looking for sympathy but finding only the faint glow of reading, lights and passengers immersed in books or movies. Her eyes landed on the window where streaks of sunlight cut through the clouds below. She remembered landing in Miami, the feeling of warm air against her face, the excitement of vacation. That thought was a small comfort, but the sting of what had happened gnawed at her. Naomi picked up her phone and typed a message to her friend Angela. "Something weird happened. The attendant threw away my sandwich." Angela's reply was almost instant. "What? Why?" Naomi hesitated, then typed back. "She said no outside food during meal service, but I asked at check-in." Angela's next message was full of question marks and angry emojis. Naomi put her phone down, feeling a twinge of gratitude for the friend she couldn't see. She decided to finish her meal quietly. She ate the chicken, the sauce tangling with the chicken's mild flavor and the saltiness of the buttered bread. She chewed slowly, thinking about how food could comfort, but only if it was given with respect. When she swallowed the last bite, she closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breathing. The remainder of the meal service continued without further incident. The flight attendant collected empty plates and moved on to clear trays. Naomi folded her napkin neatly and placed it beside her. She considered calling the attendant over to explain what happened, but she worried it might only make things worse. Instead, she waited until the cabin crew had passed, then pressed the call button again. The attendant appeared a moment later. Naomi said gently, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to let someone know about my experience." The attendant's face softened slightly as though the sharp edge of authority had dulled. "I understand," Naomi continued. "I know policies are policies, but I felt embarrassed that my food was taken without a chance to explain." The attendant paused, glanced around so no one else would overhear, and then leaned in. "I'm really sorry," she whispered. "The policy just changed this week and we haven't had time to update all the signage or onboard pamphlets. I should have offered you a warning. That was my mistake." She gave a small, sincere nod before retreating. Naomi closed her eyes and let the apology sink in. It didn't bring back her sandwich, but it softened the raw edges of her upset. She tucked her phone back into her bag and leaned forward to look out the window once more. The sun had dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. She thought about the rest of her journey, the arrival in Miami, the taxi ride to her hotel, and the cold drink she would order by the pool. She knew she would move past this moment soon. Her vacation still awaited, with all its pleasures and new experiences. But she also knew she would remember this particular flight, not for the meal she ate, but for the meal she lost, and for how she found her voice again, even at 35,000 feet. Naomi tried to put the sandwich episode behind her as the plane continued its journey to Miami, but the memory kept pulling at the edges of her thoughts. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, only for the sound of her phone's camera click to pull her back. Delta Marcus Lee, her friend traveling with her, sat in the adjacent aisle seat. He had quietly slipped his phone out and filmed the moment the attendant tossed Naomi's sandwich into the service bin. The clipping began with Naomi speaking politely to ask if she could keep her sandwich, then showed the attendant's abrupt motion. One moment the sandwich resting neatly beside Naomi's water bottle. The next moment it vanished into the metal cart. The attendant's shrug as she walked away was almost the last frame before Marcus ended the recording. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered under his breath, sliding his phone across the small gap between their seats. "I know I said I'd stay calm, but you looked so shocked. I thought it would be good to have a record of what really happened." Naomi took the phone and watched the video again, her heart tightening at the sight of herself frozen in disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I guess it's a good thing you filmed it." She felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort, grateful to have proof, yet uneasy that her private moment had been captured without her noticing. Later, when the flight attendant was busy clearing plates from the cabin, Naomi asked Marcus, "Do you think it's okay if we share this online?" He nodded. "Absolutely. It shows what really happened. People need to know that it wasn't an accident." Naomi thought about the storm of posts she had seen in the past, stories of bad service and rude staff, some real, some exaggerated. She hoped hers felt honest and fair. "Let's just post it with a simple caption," she said. Something like, "First-class passengers' food thrown away. Watch what happens next." Marcus grinned and added a few emojis before tapping post. Almost instantly, the first likes appeared. By the time the plane landed in Miami, the short video clip had already racked up tens of thousands of views. Naomi and Marcus shared a quick text exchange. "People are seeing it," Marcus typed. "It's going viral." Naomi stared at her phone screen as the numbers climbed. 50,000 views, then 100,000. Comments began to pour in from people offering sympathy and outrage. Many were shocked that an airline would treat a first-class passenger this way. Others praised Naomi for speaking up, calling the attendant's behavior disrespectful and unnecessary. A few sarcastic commenters joked about the sandwich's tragic fate, but most responses were supportive. Once they disembarked, Naomi made her way through the terminal toward baggage claim, her mind swirling with what she might face next. She felt a mix of nervousness and relief knowing the story was out there. As she exited the airport into the warm Miami air, she realized she had no idea how the airline would respond. She and Marcus clung to each other's arms as they walked outside. "Take the shuttle to the hotel," he suggested, pulling out his phone to arrange a ride. Naomi nodded, sinking into the cool seat of the shuttle and watching the palms sway in the breeze through her window. By the time they reached the hotel, the video had reached more than 1 million views on TikTok and was being shared on Twitter, Instagram, and several major news blogs. Naomi checked a few travel websites on her phone. Some had already posted articles headlined, "Airline throws passengers' food into trash" or "First-class food snatched away." Readers left thousands of comments asking, where was the chain of command, and demanding justice for Naomi. Civil rights Tanarayan. Groups chimed in too, posting petitions on their sites calling for the airline to explain its policy. Naomi felt the world had suddenly shifted under her feet. That evening, as she and Marcus settled into their hotel room, Naomi felt exhausted, yet wired. She lay on the bed for a moment, scrolling through responses on her phone. One message stood out. "Have you been contacted by the airline yet?" She paused. No one from customer service or public relations had reached out. Later, she checked her email. Nothing. No apology, no statement, no acknowledgement of the incident. The silence from the airline worried her. She worried they might ignore the story or try to spin it in their favor, blaming her or creating excuses. The next morning, over breakfast by the hotel pool, Naomi's phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct message on Instagram from a reporter at a national news network. She introduced himself and asked if Naomi would agree to a brief interview to discuss what happened on the flight. She and Marcus looked at each other and shared a shrug. Naomi typed back, agreeing to participate. After all, she reasoned, if she could turn her unpleasant experience into something positive, like raising awareness about passenger rights, then the video would have served a good purpose. The reporter's piece aired that evening during the evening news. It showed the video clip, intercut with Naomi's calm, clear explanation of what happened and her feelings of hurt and confusion. The on-screen text asked, "How could a first-class passenger's own food be thrown away?" The reporter noted that airline policies about outside food varied between carriers, but that major airlines usually allowed small, harmless items. Airline experts and travel bloggers were interviewed to provide context. Naomi watched the segment with her phone propped against the window, the Miami nightlights twinkling beyond. She felt a surge of pride that she had spoken up, triggering real conversation about passenger treatment. Within hours of the segment airing, our food thrown away and our respect all passengers began trending on social media platforms. Passengers shared their own stories, some minor annoyances, some deeply upsetting. The collective chorus of experience created a powerful narrative. Travel bloggers posted op-eds calling for clearer communication of policies and for staff training in empathy. Naomi read thread after thread, seeing leaders in the travel industry weigh in. She found a few hopeful signs. A major aviation union tweeted that they would raise the matter with airline management, and a consumer advocacy group announced they would send a formal letter to the airline's board of directors. Through the IT whirlwind of coverage, Naomi remembered the nervous flutter she had felt when the sandwich was taken. Now she knew her moment of vulnerability had touched thousands, maybe millions of people. She realized that sometimes when something small but meaningful is taken away, speaking up can shine a light not only on the problem, but also on the need for change. As she scrolled through messages wishing her well, she smiled at one suggestion: be the face of passenger respect. It was a phrase she tucked into her heart, a reminder that even a simple video could spark a movement. By the time her vacation ended and she flew home a few days later, Naomi had an unexpected sense of accomplishment. The airline had finally issued a public statement expressing regret and promising a full review of their policies and training. Under pressure from the social media uproar, the company had committed to clearer guidelines and better communication with passengers. Naomi knew that her story, her surprise, and her courage to share had made a difference. And although the flight attendant never personally apologized on camera, Naomi felt that the larger apology, the airline's promise of change, was a fitting resolution to the viral outrage that had begun with a simple, homemade sandwich. The moment the airline's headquarters learned about the viral video, the mood in the executive offices shifted from routine business to urgent crisis. Within hours of Naomi's story spreading across social media and evening news programs, the airline's CEO, Robert Isom, was briefed by his crisis management team. The video had already been viewed by millions, and public anger was growing by the minute. Customers were demanding answers. Travel bloggers and consumer advocates were calling for accountability. The company's reputation, a hard-won asset built over decades, was at risk. Robert Isom sat in his corner office, the city skyline out, the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, and watched the clip one more time. He saw the attendant's quick, careless toss of Naomi's sandwich and the shocked look on her face. He felt a twinge of outrage that anyone on his airline would treat a passenger, let alone a first-class passenger, with such thoughtless disregard. His calm public persona gave way to a private resolve. This would not stand. Before the wheels of the plane could even touch the runway in Miami, the CEO had given instructions to assemble every piece of information: cabin surveillance footage, flight attendant reports, meal service logs, and any onboard announcements. Within a few hours, the review team gathered in a conference room. The manager of in-flight services explained that a directive had gone out quietly earlier that week, restricting outside food after meal service began. The memo, however, had not been communicated clearly to staff, nor had it been updated in training, materials, or passenger-facing documents. Next, the team watched the security video from the cabin. They saw Naomi's sandwich resting on her side table, the attendant's quick arm movement, and the sandwich's soft thud as it hit the metal bin above the galley. Then they saw the shrug and knowing look the attendant exchanged with her colleague. In that instant, any doubt evaporated. This was not an accident or misplacement. It was a deliberate act of enforcement, carried out without any courtesy or explanation. Robert Isom took a deep breath and leaned forward. "We have to be decisive," he said. "We need to show our customers, and our own people, that we stand for respect and transparency. No passenger should ever feel humiliated on our flights." He instructed his human resources chief to place the two attendants seen in the footage on immediate leave, pending further action. The third crew member, who had stayed silent, would also be interviewed. Meanwhile, the Public Relations Department prepared a statement promising a full investigation and swift, appropriate action. By midnight Eastern Time, the airline released a brief but firm public statement. "We apologize unreservedly to Ms. Naomi Clark for the distress she experienced. On board Flight 238 on May 3rd. We have zero tolerance for behavior that disrespects our customers. We are conducting a full internal review and will take decisive action to ensure this does not happen again." Almost instantly, travel writers and news outlets noted the airline's quick response. Many contrasted it with slower, more opaque reactions by other companies in similar crises. Social media commentary shifted from anger to cautious approval, with some users praising the CEO for addressing the issue head-on. But for Naomi, there was a mix of relief and curiosity. She wondered what the internal outcome would be, and whether the airline would follow through on its words. Meanwhile, at the airline's training center, managers began drafting a revised protocol for handling outside food. They recognized that many passengers brought snacks for dietary or health reasons, and that clear, courteous communication was vital. The new policy would state plainly that small personal items like sandwiches or energy bars were allowed, but that major meals should be disclosed before takeoff. Crew members would receive training on how to ask passengers politely about outside food, and they would be coached to avoid abrupt actions or dismissive language. 3 days after the incident, Robert Isom held a video conference with the senior leadership team. He announced that the 2 attendants had been terminated effective immediately, and that the 3rd crew member had been given a formal warning for failing to intervene or apologize. "Our employees are our face to the world," he said. "When they fall short, we must act, and we must learn from these mistakes." At the same time, the airline offered Naomi a formal apology letter, a full refund of her ticket, and a voucher for a future first-class flight. The letter, signed by the CEO himself, said, "Dear Ms. Clark, I want to express my deep regret for the experience you had on Flight 238. This behavior does not reflect the values we strive for each day. We have taken steps to ensure such an incident cannot happen again, and I hope you will give us another chance to serve you with the respect and care you deserve. Sincerely, Robert Isom, CEO." When Naomi received the letter, she was moved by the personal touch. She typed a thank you note back to the airline, expressing appreciation for their swift action and for listening to her concerns. She said she hoped the new training would prevent other passengers from enduring a similar embarrassment. Across the company, flight attendants and customer service representatives discussed the incident. Many expressed relief that the policy confusion was being resolved and that they would receive clearer guidelines. A few admitted they had felt uncomfortable about enforcing the new rule, but had not had the guidance to handle the situation differently. Human Resources scheduled mandatory refresher courses on customer courtesy and conflict de-escalation for all crew members. At corporate headquarters, marketing teams worked on a campaign to rebuild trust. They planned to highlight positive stories of passenger experiences, focusing on attentive service and empathetic staff. Billboards at major airports would read, "Our promise you matter," accompanied by images of smiling crew members assisting passengers of all backgrounds. That campaign would roll out in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, travel industry pundits cited the airline's response as a case study in crisis management. Business news shows invited Robert Isom to speak about leadership in high-pressure situations. He emphasized the importance of listening to customers, taking swift action when mistakes occur, and turning a negative incident into an opportunity to improve. His message resonated beyond aviation. Many corporate leaders saw parallels in their own industries. Back on the ground, Naomi felt a quiet satisfaction. She had not expected such a strong reaction from the airline. She realized that a single video, capturing an all-too-human moment, could spark change on a grand scale. She shared a post on her social channels detailing the steps the airline had taken, the firings, the new policy, and the training program. She thanked everyone who had supported her and encouraged them to keep speaking up when they encountered unfair treatment. Her followers applauded her honesty and courage. Many commented that they now felt more confident asserting their rights as passengers. Others shared stories of small airline missteps they had endured, hoping those too would be addressed. In that way, Naomi's experience became more than a personal misfortune. It became a catalyst for greater awareness and respect in air travel. A few weeks later, Naomi was surprised to receive another message, this one from the airline's chief operating officer. He invited her to visit the training center and share her perspective with new flight attendants. They wanted her to explain how the incident had felt from the passenger's point of view, so that future crews could learn empathy firsthand. Naomi accepted. On a bright June morning, she walked into a spacious classroom filled with fresh-faced trainees. She told them her story in simple, honest terms, how she had felt hopeful and excited in first class, how a quick gesture had shattered her comfort, and how the airline's response had restored her faith. She saw the trainees nodding, some with tears in their eyes. They asked questions. How could they best communicate with passengers? What should they say when enforcing a policy? Naomi answered each one, emphasizing kindness, clarity, and respect. When she finished, the instructors thanked her with applause. The COO closed the session by saying, "This is exactly the kind of lesson we want our people to learn. Policy is important, but people are more important." Naomi left the center feeling proud. She knew that her voice had helped shape the airline's culture for the better. In every future flight she took with them, she would look for the traces of that change. In the attentive question about outside food, in the polite explanation of policy, and in the small moments of human connection that make all the difference at 35,000 feet. And so, the swift action taken by the CEO after that viral video not only addressed Naomi's own experience, but also set a new standard for the entire airline. What began as a simple sandwich tossed aside became, in just a few short weeks, a catalyst for real, lasting change, proof that respect once lost can be regained, and that empathy can be taught, one flight attendant at a time. Naomi stepped off the bus at Boston Logan Airport 2 months after her Miami trip, her heart fluttering with the same mix of excitement and calm she felt before that fateful flight. This time she wasn't traveling for work or pleasure, but for something more personal. She had been invited back by the airline to see the real-world impact of the changes they made because of her experience. As she entered the main terminal, she spotted a familiar face holding a badge with her name. It was Lisa, the training manager who had organized Naomi's session with the new flight attendants. "Naomi, welcome back." Lisa greeted her with a warm smile. "We've been eager to show you what's happened." They walked past bustling check-in desks, the hum of rolling suitcases creating a steady rhythm. "Come on," Lisa said, steering her toward a quieter corner of the terminal where a small exhibit had been set up. Colorful posters lined the walls, each one featuring a passenger story and a crew member's response. One poster showed a young mother asking if she could bring her toddler's formula on board. The attendant knelt beside her with a reassuring smile. Another showed a student carrying homemade snacks, which the crew politely stored in a small bag labeled "Passenger Snacks." Naomi read through the panels feeling a swell of pride. These were real examples from flights all over the world, gathered over the past 8 weeks. Under each photo was a short caption. "We asked before we stored. We explained kindly. We made you feel welcome." The final panel bore a simple message: "Respect takes flight." Naomi turned to Lisa. "It's beautiful," she said. "I can't believe how much you've done." Lisa beamed. "Your honesty gave us the push we needed. We overhauled our entire training module on passenger empathy. Now we start every session with your story, showing attendants what respect looks like from the other side." She led Naomi to a small theater where a short video played. The footage showed flight attendants in training, practicing polite ways to ask about outside food, how to smile when enforcing policy, and how to offer alternatives if an item needed to be stored. One scene showed an attendant handing a passenger a small branded bag for their sandwich, saying, "We'll keep this safe for you until the end of the flight." Naomi recognized her own voice from the day she spoke to the trainees, explaining how a simple apology can change everything. When the video ended, Lisa guided Naomi toward a mock cabin set up for demonstrations. Rows of seats replicated first, class, business class, and economy. A trainer stood by with a meal cart ready to role play. "Would you like to try?" the trainer asked, offering the seat next to the cart. Naomi nodded. The trainer picked up an imaginary sandwich, smiled, and said, "I see you've brought a snack. Would you like us to store it for you or keep it at your seat? If you want it later, just let me know." Naomi felt as though she were 28 again, hearing that kind tone. She smiled back. "Thank you. That would be great," she replied. The trainer gently placed the pretend sandwich into a clear container labeled with Naomi's name, then handed it back with a warm, "We'll bring this to you when you're ready." "That's the new standard," Lisa explained. "No more surprises, no more abrupt actions. We want passengers to feel cared for." Naomi thought about how much this meant, not just for her, but for everyone who flies. She imagined families, carrying homemade food for young children, older passengers with dietary restrictions, and travelers from all backgrounds feeling seen and respected. After the demonstration, Lisa escorted Naomi to a small gathering of employees, flight attendants, training staff, and corporate leaders. The group applauded as Naomi entered, and she took a seat at a round table. The airline's COO stood next to her, offering a thank you gift, a framed collage of photographs from Naomi's Miami flight, her initial arrival in first class, the moment the sandwich was tossed, captured from surveillance footage, and Naomi speaking to the trainees. Below the images was a handwritten note. "To Naomi for sparking change. With gratitude, your airline family." Naomi's eyes filled with tears as she accepted the gift. "I want to say thank you," she began, her voice steady. "When I posted that video, I never imagined it would lead to this. I just wanted my sandwich back. But I see now that a simple act of respect can mean so much. You've shown me and your passengers that every person matters." She turned to a flight attendant in uniform. "You're the face of this change," she said. "Your kindness will stick with people for years." The attendant nodded, her eyes bright. Over the next hour, Naomi listened to stories from the staff. A senior flight attendant described how she used the new guidelines to help a passenger on a red-eye flight carry his homemade soup safely. A cabin service manager explained how they updated their meal tracking software to flag outside food items, ensuring crew members knew exactly where to find someone's snack. A staffer from customer relations shared that passenger compliments had increased by 25% since the policy shift, and complaints about outside food had dropped to nearly zero. As the meeting wrapped up, Naomi and Lisa stepped outside into the warm afternoon air. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished," Naomi said. "This goes beyond me. You're changing airline culture." Lisa smiled. "It's been a team effort, but your voice was the spark. We still have work to do, rolling out the C program to every flight, every country, every staff member. But this is a huge step." Later, as she sat in a quiet corner of the airport lounge, Naomi reflected on how a small moment of injustice had turned into something much larger. She thought back to the first time she boarded that plane, hopeful and excited. Then, the shock of seeing her sandwich thrown away, the embarrassment and quiet anger. Next, the viral video, the media attention, and the CEO's swift action. And now this day, a day of celebration, of real change, of possibility. She opened her tote bag and pulled out a small notebook. On the first page, she had written, May 3, 2025, Flight 238, first class, sandwich thrown away. Underneath, she had left space for another note. Today, she wrote in neat letters, July 15, 2025, airline retraining launched globally. Respect takes flight. She closed the notebook and smiled. As her next flight was called, Naomi rose and gathered her things. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction and curiosity for what lay ahead. Maybe she would travel to another country and test the new policies herself, ordering a meal in first class and tucking her homemade snack into its clear bag. Maybe she would blog about respectful travel and inspire other industries to follow suit. She knew one thing for sure: her voice mattered. Walking down the jetway, she spotted a friendly attendant at the door, ready to welcome her on board. The attendant offered her a warm smile and said, Good afternoon, Ms. Clark. Welcome back. May I store your snack for you? Naomi smiled broadly and handed over her small container. Yes, please, she replied. As she settled into her seat, she realized that true respect sometimes begins with a question, and sometimes it begins with a sandwich.